Pull up a chair, grab your coffee, and get comfortable. Because today, we are not rushing. It is February 22, 2026, and I've got two stories that have been rattling around in my head all week, and I want to give them the full treatment they deserve. No Twitter-length hot takes, no 30-second clips stripped of context. We're going to sit down, go deep, and come out the other side actually understanding what happened, which I know is a radical concept in today's media environment. Two stories. First, the Epstein Files, the 3.5 million pages that just dropped, and what the left is doing with them versus what they actually say. Second, the Texas Senate primary race between James Tallarico and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and why Tallarico's little stunt on the Maher Show is one of the more blatant pieces of political theater we've seen in a while. Now, I want to be upfront with y'all like I always am. This channel leans right. We're pro-Trump, we're pro-common sense, and we're deeply skeptical of the mainstream media narrative machine. But everything I tell you today comes from real places: DOJ releases, congressional records, AP reporting, FBI interview transcripts, on-air admissions, and sourced news coverage. Because unlike a lot of folks out there, I believe the truth is always our strongest argument. We don't need to make anything up. Reality is on our side. Let's start with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, if you've been living under a rock, which honestly sounds peaceful at this point, Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy financier and convicted sex offender who ran an international trafficking network for years, abusing young girls and connecting powerful men to his operation. He died in federal custody in August of 2019 under circumstances that remain controversial, and ever since, there has been enormous public demand to know who else was involved, who knew, who was protected. That is a completely legitimate demand. The American people have every right to that information. And here's the thing: Donald Trump agreed. On November 19, 2025, President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act into law. The DOJ then released approximately 3.5 million pages of documents in January of 2026. 3.5 million pages. That is one of the largest document drops in the history of federal law enforcement. And the man who made it happen was Donald J. Trump. Now, how did the left cover this? Did they lead with Trump forces unprecedented transparency on Epstein case? Did they applaud the release of documents that Democrats had been demanding for years? Of course not. What they did was cherry-pick. They found that Trump's name appears roughly 1,500 times across the documents, and they ran that number like it was a conviction. 1,500 mentions. Sounds damning, right? Until you actually read what those mentions say. The vast majority of references to Trump in those documents come from Epstein himself, and they are not flattering to Epstein's relationship with Trump. They are Epstein trash-talking Trump, calling him dangerous, making wild, unverified claims. The White House was quick to point out that many of these references come from what officials described as unfounded tips submitted during the 2020 election cycle. Opposition research dressed up as intelligence. Garbage in, garbage out. Now, do the documents show Trump had a social connection to Epstein in the 90s? Yes. They were both wealthy men in New York and Palm Beach in the same social circles. There's a 2003 letter with Trump's signature found in Epstein's contacts, inside what press is calling a little black book, next to a rough sketch that, yes, is of a woman's figure. Tacky? Sure. Criminal? Absolutely not. That's a social contact list, not a co-conspirator registry. Bill Clinton appeared in those logs too, and flew on the Lolita Express 27 times by various accounts, but somehow that number doesn't trend the same way on CNN. Flight logs do show Trump took around 7 trips on Epstein's plane in the 90s, mostly short hops between Palm Beach and New York. Here's the critical context the media buries every single time. Those flights occurred before any public knowledge of Epstein's crimes, before the 2005 Palm Beach investigation, before any victim had come forward publicly. Trump was not the only person in America who interacted with Epstein socially before the world knew who he really was. But here is where Trump's story separates from every other name in those files, and it separates dramatically. Around the year 2004, Donald Trump banned Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, permanently. And the reason matters. Epstein had been at a Mar-a-Lago event and allegedly approached a young woman, a teenage girl who worked in the spa, and made inappropriate overtures. She reported it. Trump found out, and Epstein was gone. No second chances, no quiet handling, no cover-up. Gone. That account has been corroborated. And then it gets even more specific. In 2006, when the Palm Beach Police Department began their investigation into Epstein, Trump personally called the Palm Beach police chief. He said, according to the chief's own FBI interview, something along the lines of, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everybody knew he was up to no good." Trump volunteered information to law enforcement. He did not hide. He did not lawyer up and go silent. He picked up the phone and called the cops. I want you to think about that for a second. Ask yourself, does that sound like the behavior of a man who is complicit in Epstein's operation? Or does it sound like a man who was disgusted by what Epstein was doing and wanted him stopped? And then, fast forward to 2025, he signs the law that releases everything, every page, every document, every uncomfortable name. If Trump had something serious to hide in those files, he would have buried them, not released them. The man signed the Transparency Act. He forced the sunlight. That is not the behavior of someone with guilt on his conscience. Meanwhile, what are Democrats doing? The same thing they always do. They find the headline that fits their narrative, strip it of context, and blast it across social media. Trump mentioned 1,500 times in Epstein Files. Great. Epstein also mentioned that Trump was dangerous and not to be trusted. So apparently Epstein and the Democrats finally agree on something. Make of that what you will. The real story of the Epstein Files, and the story that responsible journalism should be telling, is about the individuals who are conspicuously absent from coverage. The people who flew on that plane dozens of times. The people whose names appear in the documents not as critics of Epstein, but as participants in his social world after the red flags were flying. That investigation deserves to continue, but it needs to go where the evidence leads, not where it's politically convenient. Now let's shift from Florida to Texas because we have ourselves a Senate primary race that is getting interesting, and a candidate who just got caught playing fast and loose with the truth on national television. The race is between James Tallarico and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, two Democrats competing for the Senate seat in Texas. Now, both of them are progressive. Neither of them are getting my vote. But there is a meaningful difference between running a race on your actual ideas versus manufacturing a grievance to grab headlines and fundraising dollars. And Tallarico just crossed that line. Here's what happened. Tallarico was booked to appear on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. For a state-level candidate running in a competitive primary, that is a big platform. National audience, friendly host, perfect opportunity to make your case directly to voters. But the appearance got pulled. And when Tallarico showed up on Bill Maher's show shortly after, he looked straight into the camera and said that Trump's FCC had blocked the segment. He implied, strongly, that the Trump administration had personally intervened to yank him off CBS. That is a serious accusation. If it were true, it would be a genuine First Amendment issue. A sitting president's regulatory agency suppressing a political candidate's speech on a major network, that would be a scandal. That would deserve wall-to-wall coverage. But it is not true. Here's what actually happened, and it's been confirmed by multiple sources, including Colbert himself. CBS's own legal team pulled the segment. The network's lawyers got involved because of concerns about the FCC's Equal-Time Rule, a long-standing Federal Communications Commission regulation that says if a broadcast network gives airtime to one political candidate, they have to offer comparable time to opposing candidates. Jasmine Crockett is in the same race. If CBS put Tallarico on Colbert, they'd need to give Crockett equal time too. Rather than deal with that logistical and legal headache, CBS's lawyers said no. Stephen Colbert acknowledged this on air. CBS acknowledged it internally. Nobody from the White House called CBS. Nobody from the FCC called the show's producers and said, "Kill the Tallarico segment." Now, is it fair to say that the FCC under Trump has tightened its guidance on the Equal Time Rule? Yes, that's accurate. The current FCC has made clear that talk shows are not automatically exempt from equal time considerations the way they used to be treated. That is a legitimate policy debate worth having. But there is a massive canyon-wide difference between the regulatory environment changed and CBS got nervous, and Trump personally silenced me. One is a nuanced media policy story. The other is a fabricated victim narrative designed to generate sympathy and, let's be honest, donations. And Tallarico knew the difference. He's not a naive candidate who misunderstood what happened. He's a former state legislator who knows how these things work. He made a choice to frame this as a Trump hit job because it was good politics. Outrage generates clicks. Clicks generate shares. Shares generate fundraising emails. It's a cynical but well-worn playbook. Lauren Boebert, who was also on the Maher panel, called it out immediately and directly. It wasn't President Trump that canceled you. It was CBS. Simple, accurate, and said to his face. Crockett herself, his primary opponent, remember, agreed with the basic premise, pointing out that Colbert could have simply invited her to appear alongside Tallarico to satisfy the equal time requirement. The show declined to do that. That's a CBS editorial decision, not a White House directive. What Tallarico did is something we see constantly from the modern Democratic Party, and it is worth naming clearly. When things don't go your way, find a way to make Trump the villain. Even when Trump had nothing to do with it. It fires up the base. It dominates the news cycle. It moves money. And if someone fact-checks you 3 days later, the correction gets 1/10 the attention the original claim did. This matters beyond just one Senate primary in Texas. It matters because it is a pattern. And the more we let these kinds of claims go unchallenged, the more the political discourse degrades into whoever can tell the most compelling victim story, regardless of whether it's true. Texas deserves better than that. The voters in that primary deserve to make a decision based on what these candidates actually believe and what they'll actually fight for, not based on who can best manufacture outrage and point fingers at Washington. Now, I want to zoom out for a second, because these two stories, as different as they are on the surface, actually tell the same underlying story about where we are politically in 2026. In both cases, you have a Democratic narrative that requires you to not look too closely. With Epstein, it requires you to see the number 1,500 mentions and stop reading before you find out those are mostly Epstein criticizing Trump. It requires you to ignore that Trump banned Epstein from his property, called the police, and then signed the law releasing every document. It requires selective memory and selective outrage. With Tallarico, it requires you to accept his version of events without checking whether CBS's own lawyers told a different story, which they did on the record, on air. In both cases, sunlight is the antidote. Read the documents. Watch the full clip. Listen to what the other people in the room actually said. The truth is accessible. It just requires 30 extra seconds of effort and a willingness to follow the evidence, even when it doesn't confirm what you wanted to believe. That's what this channel is about. That's what I'll keep doing every week. Not because it's always easy, and not because our side gets everything right. We don't. Nobody does. But because informed citizens make better decisions, and better decisions make a better country. If this breakdown was useful, smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read every one, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'll keep the lights on and the truth first.